Now, without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our two guests, Sasha Novakovic and Dr. Jill Becker. Welcome to the panel today.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining. Now, I'm going to give a quick bio for each of them, and we'll just jump right into the content. First with Sasha. Sasha is the co-founder and CEO of Alchemy, an enterprise SaaS company that's modernizing the $1 trillion specialty chemicals industry. Sasha combines her specialty chemicals industry expertise and executive experience to lead strategy and drive execution across Alchemy's US and European offices. She previously co-founded Get Connected Inc., where she grew the business to over 20 million in ARR, and also served as an entrepreneur in residence at Harvard Business School. Dr. Jill Becker is a serial entrepreneur. She previously held roles as the founder and CEO at Cambridge Nanotech, as well as 01239 Inc. I'm curious to hear the story behind the naming convention for that one. And she's also held roles as expert in residence at Harvard Innovation Lab and EIR at Boston University. Jill's currently the CEO and founder of Cubotics, an AI-driven materials discovery platform that has raised just a bit over $15 million to date, and is working with major materials corporations around the world to develop and commercialize breakthrough products for the materials science industry. Welcome to you both, and I'm very excited to be diving into these topics today.
It's great to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, let's get right into it. We are here today to talk about some of the challenges in the industry, some of the novel breakthroughs that have come up, and how you're both using your backgrounds and your companies to try and solve these challenges. Early in in the mid-90s, there was a MIT Technology Review paper by Thomas Eagar, who's a professor at MIT, talking about some of the challenges with commercializing new materials, with the really long, arduous workflow that exists to do that. From invention to being in consumers' hands, it used to take an average of 20 years to produce these new products and materials. Why has it been so time consuming in particular to produce new products? Why aren't these industries more like the software industry that we've seen today with constant iteration, really, really fast developmental timelines? Let's start off with that. Sasha, Jill, what are your thoughts? Why has it taken so long historically to produce new materials and chemicals in this industry?
I can start. It's because people are using 18th century methods, and they've never been dared to be disrupted. And I think in part because there's a lot of romanticism about the way science is done. I mean, you come up with a hypothesis, it's usually in the form of a question, and then you follow the scientific method. And at Cubotics, we've sped up the scientific method using 21st century tools. And I think also R&D is extremely expensive, and there's a lot of failures, and a lot of these big companies are for-profit companies that have to make their shareholders happy. So it's not like in the olden days, Bell Labs, that go forth and here spend some money. That it doesn't really happen anymore. So there had to be a better way, and since there's a lot more computing power now, there's these great AI algorithms and machine learning where you drive the cost down from cost at least $100 per chemical, if not more, to synthesize, even with the overhead. And we've driven that down to $0.0001 per chemical. And that's why as a small startup, we can look at millions of molecules and actually have our AI software, which we call our AI brain, dream up new chemicals. But what we're attacking is what is known as the productivity chasm. You have these amazing chemical companies. They're very good at what they do. Supply chain management, large scale production. They spend at least $150 billion a year on R&D with very little results. That goes to the end product manufacturers, whether that's a car or fertilizers or whatever it is. And they actually have huge needs for new materials. So there's a demand, but it still takes 10 to 15 years to get a chemical into an actual product. And right now the discovery is too slow and the success rate is too low. And that's why we felt like the market was really ready for a player like us, where we can in months, dream up a new chemical, but still there's the chemical, then you have to think about, and we can use the AI, how to bring this into, let's say, a formulation or a thin film, and then also the end product, whether that's a battery or whatever, the actual device also needs testing. And we can use AI along that whole trajectory in order that the AI continues to learn and make better predictions in the front end.
Gotcha. So it sounds like for you, at Cobotics, you're focusing mainly on both the discovery piece as well as the development piece. And those are two of the major funnels that you're looking to attack, as far as trying to broaden and make it easier to develop new materials. And Sasha, what about you? What are the different parts of that value chain or the different challenges that, the industry faces? What are you focusing on at Alchemy?
Yeah, I think, what Jill said is very, very true. I'm not sure it's 18th century. I mean, certainly paper and pencil have been around for quite a long time and everyone's still using them. But I would say it's definitely, a lot of legacy software applications. And I think the scientific process is not conducive to the vast majority of software that exists today that is built for a much more linear, non-scientific product development process. And so when you say, why is it not more like the software industry? There's real reasons. There's so much more software that is made exclusively for, or that can be used in high tech that just, simply is a square peg in a round hole for chemicals and materials. I think, for us, we really look at, what's the customer context, what's going on there? Does your company have competency in assessing what's needed, what the holes are in the marketplace? What the competitive landscape looks like, what do you do with that information? How does that inform your conceptualization process in terms of, you could be working on 100 things, you could be working on 1,000 things, but not all ideas are great ideas. And the reality is that, companies need to have some sort of structured process to go from the superset to the things that they're actually going to deploy resources against. And you can definitely use software and workflow automation in the case of surveying the landscape, in the case of, whittling down those concepts. And then I think, a lot of what chemical companies focus on is the chemistry itself. And I think you can absolutely deploy AI across the board and in particular on the chemistry. And from our standpoint, there's a whole set of lab operations that need to be digitalized, I would say, in support of the product development process. And that's a lot of people, obviously, from scientists and chemists and lab techs. And there's a lot of IT and operational support that's going in there that, that's also cost, right? All of the different pieces of software that are there. And then there's commercialization. So, I think the question is, how do you have gates along the way and have decision points where you really can assess what to keep and what to kill? Is it technically feasible? Can you get the BOM below the cost that the market will support? Can you actually manufacture? Do you have to manufacture everything at scale, or, do you have a flexible manufacturing where you can actually manufacture, something that's not so scaled up, but still make money on it? And I think, our vision is that all of these workflows can be automated. There's a tremendous amount of data that can be generated. Ideally, it's all AI ready so that you can run AI on it. And I know you and I have had at least one conversation on that. And that's really the vision for Alchemy, is to digitalize these workflows, create AI ready data so that, as an organization, you can leverage and you can connect those data dots and you can really leverage them to your business benefit.
Gotcha. And there's a common theme here. I think both with you, at Alchemy as well as Jill Cobotics, you're both battling inefficiencies in the process, right? Whether it's, most people tend to focus on the inefficiencies within the development process, where it's design, development, testing, supply chain, all of the scaling. But, I think, Sasha, you've also identified at Alchemy that there is a lot of collaboration. There's, data transfer. There are all these different moving pieces, especially when you have multiple different organizations with the mega corporations that we have today, as well as distributed work. I think there's a lot of these challenges that have to be, also overcome if we want to battle those same inefficiencies. So, and those are things that are pervasive throughout the entire process, from design to full having a product on the market. So I'm glad that we have that kind of those two diverse perspectives today to provide just insights on what it's like, or what parts of the problem we need to solve, both not only on design and development, but also on making it easier for people to work better. So I think I'm glad to have those perspectives today. And both of you have kind of addressed this a little bit, but why is now the right time to modernize R&D? What are the things that were not available 10, 20, 30 years ago that have made it possible to really see this next evolution in the materials and chemicals industry?
Well, sure. I was gonna say, certainly, as Jill already mentioned, I think processing and compute power is significantly cheaper. To be honest, I feel like you could have asked this question 5 years ago and there'd practically be the same answer. Mm-hmm. The industry could be modernized even 5 years ago, and I can guarantee in 5 years there will be companies that are saying, hey, I really need to get on the digitalization bandwagon, and I need to do things in a different way than I'm doing them today. I think it's very much a continuum. I mean, what we're seeing is that, frankly, something like COVID is a big catalyst for companies to actually digitalize, because if you have digital workflows, you actually can distribute the work. You can work from many discrete locations. You don't need to have everybody in the same place at the same time to get work done. You can shift out what needs to get done. You can divide up your workflows in different ways, especially if you manage your workflows centrally and distribute them locally. So, what we've seen is that digitalization is really risk mitigation and business continuity in the context of an event like COVID.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So, anything to add there?
Yeah, besides the computing power and the invention of these AI algorithms and machine learning, for us, it's also the miniaturization of chemical equipment. Mm. That, like, for example, nuclear magnetic resonance machine, NMR, that you might use as a chemist, used to cost, I don't know, $500,000. It's giant. It needs to be cool. It needs to have its own separate room and a trained technician that you would pay maybe $80,000 to. We now have benchtop NMR, benchtop HPLC, and that's what we really needed to build the world's first self-driving lab. So you all are familiar with the scientific discovery, and we have our AI methods instead of a human now predicting what chemicals you should be making with accuracy. Then we have a robot synthesizing the top candidates, another robotic suite testing, did you make what you said you're going to make? And does it have the properties of interest? And you're left actually with a chemical ready for prototyping. But I also agree with Sasha that digitalization, I mean, I am so grateful to be running an AI company at this moment in time. Imagine if you're trying to sell clothes or you own a chain of restaurants. Yeah. I have 17 people, all safe at home, and business continues. And how can that possibly work? I'll give you an example. We were working with NIH NCATS. So we're here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. They're in Washington. And what they do is they test for viruses. And their brute force design of experiment takes 49 hours. And very quickly and remotely, we optimize that down to 9 hours, giving them 40 more hours to save lives. And yes, they do nothing but COVID testing right now. And at the same time, we managed with our optimization AI to reduce the amount of enzyme that they need for these enzyme assays that they use to test for the virus down to a factor of 5 times. So if our mission is to increase the rate of discovery at a reduced cost, where are we saving the cost? Okay, right now here it was time and amount of enzymes, and also we don't need as many people. And you shouldn't fear for your job. It just means we're freeing you up to do other things, right? And we're actually teeing you up for success. We're saying, make this, not that.
Yeah, I really agree, because I think, so many people are fearful of technology, and I think it's just the nature of work is going to change. So, if you take the average worker that's spending 20% of their week just looking for data, it's completely non-value added time. If you can tee the right data up with the right tools for that person to do their job, then they can actually spend that time on value added work, and really the chemistry itself. And so, you know, what we've seen time and time again is that there are a lot of tasks that are being done manually by a person that can be completely automated by software or algorithms, you know, however you want to call it. And, you know, whether it's shrinking things down by a factor of 5 or like orders of magnitude, it's absolutely possible. You know, we see it in terms of just data reentry, like everything coming off of a machine should go right into software, into some sort of data repository. There's no reason that, you know, humans should be touching it at all. And it's tremendous time savings and error prevention mechanism. So, you know, I think you can go through all the workflows in the lab. And if you actually take that workflow automation approach and say, okay, what's best done by software, you know, or a system, you know, what's best done by a human, you know, how do you merge it all together and really optimize the process overall? And then you can really take down that, you know, faster time to revenue on new product development, lower lab costs per sale. I mean, pick a business metric, they're all very important. But that's really what you're trying to achieve. And I think, you know, whether you're working with a partner to do this, or you have to do it yourself, the reality is you want to be able to tie that investment in software to real operating metric improvements. And those real operating metric improvements will tie to financial metric improvements. And it's very doable today. It's no longer, you know, technology for technology's sake. You know, we're in the business of technology, just like our customers are in the business of chemistry and materials, right? So it's all got to tie together.
Makes a lot of sense. Go ahead, Jill.
The other thing I'm hoping about is the standardization of data, so that can be more easily shared, because everyone sort of collects data differently. And I think there's a lot of bias in a lot of data. I mean, the dirty secret in papers and patents is that they're not reproducible. As a scientist, it always made sense to me why patents aren't reproducible, but it was annoying that papers weren't. And that's because I think we don't mention accidentally that tiny things could matter in an outcome. And maybe we can figure that out if there's a way to standardize it. I mean, if you walk into a big company like 3M, you walk into one lab and you say, hey, what are you working on? They can tell you. And then if you ask, like, what did you work in this lab 2 years ago? They may or may not know. Or 10 years ago, forget about it. And then you ask, what are they working on in the labs left and right of you? No clue. I think a lot of these big companies are reinventing what's something they've already invented 15 years ago. And even the sharing of data, like you could imagine one day there'd be massive amounts of open data that anyone could use. The problem right now we see is that, yes, there's paid and open databases, but there's a lot of bias in that data. So we actually spend quite a bit of time to clean that bias out of it. And we also generate our own data because we can, as a double check, because we don't want to infect our AI software. We think of it as our AI brain, right? And we want this AI brain to think in 220 plus dimensions in all of chemical space. Now, if I think how big is chemical space, could be 10 to the 60, it could be 10 to the 80. I do not know. It blows my mind, actually. And if you pretend to know how big chemical space is and then take, you know, big chemical companies and put their patent portfolios in as dots, they're small little regions and very close to each other. I want to know what's going on up here. Why has no one gone there, right? And also, I think there's very little understanding of how these things actually happen, why they happen. And I think we're also working right now to have a toxicity prediction module, because we feel like that's very, very important. If you really knew how toxic this was, not just for the MSDS sheets, that's material safety data sheets. And those are also how, you know, if you look up sand is very dangerous, very, very dangerous. So it's not, I think there's also a fear, especially if, for chemistry, there's a fear. And I understand that. I have a respect for chemicals and what they can do. And I also think we have to think about ethics when it comes to AI, especially when it comes to, you know, ethical decisions of what you should be making, right? And also this human robot and human AI interactions is going to be very interesting. I think as a humanity, when we choose that a class of people is less than, we've behaved very poorly. And I'm not saying give robots rights, but I'm just a little bit worried that I think we need to be kinder as a humanity to each other. And I don't have all the answers, but yeah, I have weird questions when it comes to, it's not to hijack it here, so, but.
I have a lot to unpack there, but Jill and Sasha, I was really hoping that you would have all the answers. That was the reason we invited you here today.
I don't, I'm just open to learn.
I wanted to just key off something that, oh, I love it. Yeah, there you go, business. Woo. You know, I wanted to key off something.
Last letter.
Oh, coronavirus. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. You know, I wanted to key off something that you said, Jill, because I think that for, you know, there is a lot of bias in data, and a lot of the data is incomplete, and a lot of the data has no context, and you don't really understand the circumstances under which the formulation was created or the testing was done. And you know, I think so much of what we're doing is very unsexy, being really candid relative to what you do. But, you know, a lot of what we do is try to help organizations really figure out what is best in class in terms of data collection, and then creating software that they're humans that they've got in the lab that are still working and will continue to work. You know, how can they interact with software to make sure that everything is labeled properly, you know, the data is validated on entry, we have that context, it is attributed to the person, it is time-stamped, you know, you can see the arc of the data over time, there is a dependency network of other data associated with that data point. And I think that that's really, really critical. I've never met a technical director who didn't have a very specific opinion about what they viewed as best in class data collection. That they would love for everybody to be following. And if you can make it really easy with the right software, so give people the right data and the right tools, pull stuff off of machines, be able to interact and collaborate digitally with your peers, you know, keep that, the super set of information. So you see the intellectual dialogue that took place at certain critical moments in projects, and you have a record of 100% of it all for future reuse, so you don't redo the projects. Because everybody, I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a big company or a small company, everybody is redoing work unnecessarily. So up and down the food chain, it's a you know, a universal issue. But you know, I do think that there is something to that, and I think we can make the quality of people's jobs better. No one wants to rekey data. No, you know, everyone hates it when they've, you know, made a data entry error, or you got someone else's work and you have no idea what they did, why they did it, and then you basically have to redo it anyway because you don't have the context. I just think there's so much room for improvement, and it's, you know, it's factors, if not an order of magnitude better than, you know, how people are doing things today.
Yeah, and actually, like on the topic of data integrity, you know, obviously, like there's the actual collection of data, there's the organization of data, there's the use and utilization of that data. You know, one thing that I've been, you know, surprised to see, I think there's two parts to this. One, you know, there's a romanticization of the scientific method in the way that we were potentially all taught, you know, in elementary school, middle school. There's this idea that scientists write in lab notebooks and, you know, they scratch things out. And there's, you know, unfortunately, that's not a really easy way. It's really hard to maintain data integrity across organizations or, you know, inter-departments in that way. So, you know, for all, especially like this really large workforce that we already have in the chemicals and materials industry, how do you retrain people to take advantage of new solutions? You know, I think like I look at a parallel in the life sciences industry where we're seeing tons of companies. You know, I think they were like life sciences and biotech has really kind of driven innovation in the sense that they were very quick to market on, you know, computational AI applications for designing new molecules, for testing them. A lot of that innovation has started in life sciences. Why hasn't it been so easily transferable to the materials and chemicals industries?
I think attitude and money. So the pharma industry has always been hipper and a little bit cooler, and you can even see that in the
Younger,
amounts
more
of
profitable. Yeah.
money raised, right?
Yeah.
And I think they were very driven. It shouldn't cost $1 billion to get a drug that gets you revenue of a couple $1 billion. Like how do you balance that? And I think Eli Lilly had built a lab with all robots already. I mean, they're very used to it. And I think in part this romanticism, I think there's also a lot of big companies. There's a lot of politics in these companies. I think there's a lot of, cover your ass mentality. Who wants to stick their neck out for new technology? Now, a lot of these companies actually do have internal digital innovation offices or material informatics, but they're treated as I think people are afraid to lose their jobs if they're successful. So they don't really want to invest the time and the money. It's usually a team of 5, roughly on average. I think it shows again how we're not perfect as humans. But I think as we show that this works and we can help you, right? You can go to any department head. How much you spent on R&D last year? Oh, that's a lot. How about I cut that in half? I think, that if you can prove that, which I can't right now, but that's where we're headed, then I think change will happen. Because especially in America, everything's driven by the dollar. And people will fall in line. And I'm not knocking basic research. I mean, I have a PhD in chemistry from Harvard, but in 1999, I invented chemicals that went into the chips that you and I use every day. I got a check last year, 20 years later. Now, I like the fact that I got a check, but it shouldn't take 20 years, you know what I mean, to capture the value that the chemicals and materials really can play. And so, yeah.
Well, and I think that some of that gets to, how do you think about your commercialization process and how close are you to your customers and how close are you to your end markets and your suppliers? Because I think, it's a team sport, just like it's a team sport within a company to commercialize something new. It's a team sport within your ecosystem. And, so we don't even just look at workflows, that are resident within a company, but we're also looking at processes that involve third parties. And how do you make it really easy to collaborate with people who are not in your company, but whose data or input you're relying on heavily to get to a commercializable product faster, and also to make sure that it's actually meeting their needs, that it fits for the intended use, whatever that use may be. And I do think that, we're getting to this point where, it should be, significantly faster to create derivative products. And we shouldn't be in a situation where everything needs to be made at scale in order to make money on it. So, I mean, just like in steel, mini mills really disrupted production for very large steel companies. I think there's going to be advances on the production side as well to be able to facilitate smaller runs and still make money. I think all of these things are in play right now, but it's really an ecosystem. And it's an ecosystem that spans a lot of functions in a company, and it actually spans, companies outside your company as well.
There's a common theme that I'm hearing about speed. Speed is crucial. Speed is like really, really important. We don't want it to be a 20-year or time to return on investment. And if you're looking for an 8% return on ROI on $1 invested in R&D, you need to have 100x value in 20 years for it to actually meet that value return. And that's not even to talk about all the failures that there'll be along the way. So really, I think by just fundamentally reducing that timeline, I think, Jill, you were talking about the chemical space, this entire huge area that, we can focus on developing and producing new innovations and technologies. And a lot of, I think, the existing industries cluster around these well-known and characterized areas because that's where they know they can make money. I think, being able to kind of explore beyond that is important, obviously. But part of the reason that it doesn't make sense to, or it hasn't made sense to in these larger industries is because it's striking out into the unknown where you don't know if you're going to get that 100x on that dollar invested, in which case you're hemorrhaging money in a relatively low margin industry to begin with. So I think this is where startups can really bring a totally different perspective rather than have 500, 1,000, 2,000 R&D people working on like a very complicated problem that we know that will reduce capital. I think one of the things I often just I see R&D departments get impressed by is the fact that really small 10, 15, 20 people teams and startups can produce an outsized amount of innovation, whether it's developing new materials or enabling. There's this lever for impact, I think, that's a lot easier to push when you're a small startup than if you're, say, a larger corporation. Is that something that you feel that you've both also seen in your conversations with corporations?
Yes, it takes them 6 weeks to get out an NDA, and I can do that like in 10 minutes. So it's what happens when you grow up. You always hope you don't, but and there's certain levels. It's usually number of people and revenue. So that's why I think a mission is very important, and you can always incubate like an innovation team as well in order to keep that alive.
Well, and I think some of it is that you could do anything. We always talk internally. My co-founder always says, well, anything's possible with enough time and money, right? And it's totally true. I think in almost every space. And I think the question is, what are people working on? I mean, because is it chemistry for chemistry's sake? Is it the material for the material's sake? Is there a real intent? Like, what is it that you're going to do with this? Is there a value to that? And I think if we start at that point and actually analyze our competency around, okay, what do markets need? What do consumers need? Because I fully believe that we're in a new era of innovation where there are entire categories of products that don't exist today, but that are hugely, hugely necessary for the planet, humanity, the world. And how do we go from problem spaces to products? I think that process really needs to be assessed by companies, because it's just too easy to work on every cool thing that comes up. And there's got to be vetting up front, and I think it's got to be business driven on what to work on based on what you actually can sell at the end of this process that's going to make you money, because the whole point is to commercialize the product. So I definitely think there's area, that's a whole problem space that needs to be worked on.
Yeah. And go ahead, Jill.
The problem is that people need to make the chemical first, and there's already a lot of failure in that, in order to be able to put it in some sort of formulation, thin film, et cetera, to get it into your end product and device, right? So a chemical company recently came to us. They had dreamt up 2,300 possible lubricants, okay? And it would take them, 5+ years and hundreds of thousands of dollars to make. We ranked them for them using our AI, and they were interested in boiling point, vapor pressure, and viscosity. And then we built them a web portal where each of the top 200 chemicals, and they could toggle properties 1, 2, and 3 when whatever viscosity is how a liquid runs. Think honey versus water if you don't know. And we saved them, that didn't take us all that long to do, right? And the other thing, we need something to dream big, right? So recently what we did is we decided to upload all the commercially available chemicals we could find. It was a little over 7 million of them. And we're a small startup at the time. I'd raised a little over 5 million. So it's a tough tech company, but I know the VCs want me to raise every 18 to 24 months. So you better pick your business and technical milestones so that they're achievable. And you have to pick a lane, and the lane we picked is organic electronic materials. Doesn't sound sexy at all, but it actually is if you look at it. But why did we pick that? It's easier to predict and easier to make. And what we had wanted to do is build the world's first self-driving lab. You're not going to come up with a complex, crystal structure in that one, like for the first one. Like years down the line, we can have a separate self-driving lab for, the semiconductor industry and other inorganics. anyway, so one of the things we can do is we let our AI run through it, and we said, you know what, we want a good new electrochromic. Find us a chemical that we can buy that would be transparent and let the light through, but not the heat. Mm-hmm. And it found one. So we bought it, we tested it, and we're like, this works. This is great. We patented it. So with the AI, we can patent use case on other people's structure case chemicals. That's pretty cool. That just takes us a little while to do. But it got even better because we set up our AI to learn. So it goes, oh, that was the winner. That was the winner. Well, I've generated a library of candidates where that you can own the structure and use case IP as well. And so we patented that as well. And then we hope to license the chemicals that we, or sell them, that we invent. But yeah, so it saves time and money because you're kind of testing it virtually, but you can predict until the cows come home. At some point, you have to test the winners for a variety of reasons. A, to check, and B, to improve the prediction. Like all these pieces talk to each other to sort of, and we capture every single data point that we generate, actually. And that was actually also a little bit hard to set up our data lake.
Yeah, there are two things that you mentioned, Jill. I think like one, kind of, it's this idea of, like you were saying, Sasha, taking a problem space and developing a product based on that. You know, the more, now that I keep drawing these parallels to the life sciences industry, because they do, I think they've been doing an even better job now recently of taking orphan drug candidates and repurposing them for new things, right? So I think that's something that just the example that you gave, Jill, that's a perfect example of how we have a massive library of well-characterized materials and chemicals that exist. And if we can just better connect and have access to that data, which I know, Sasha, that's something that, you know, Alchemy really focuses on. You know, now we have the tools to work with to actually, you know, reduce those timelines and get, you know, solve problems for consumers a lot more quickly. You know, electrochromic glass or electrochromic materials is a good example of it. Organoelectric, you know, semiconductors eventually for if we want to have foldable phones or wearable phones or things like that, we need to get there. And those are some of the best ways to do that. So I think, like, you know, thinking about problem spaces that are more visible to the end consumer often does drive innovation, because now we have, you know, the reason hopefully fingers crossed, we'll get to a COVID vaccine in 12 to 18 months is because there's this concerted effort around a very, very visible and, you know, germane problem that everyone is basically coalescing around. So I think, you know, similarly, thinking about how to design or think about problem spaces in the materials and chemicals world that are germane to consumers, that's where we can, you know, maybe get a little bit more concentration and solving individual problems, hopefully, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, sorry. Yeah, and I was just going to say, you know, for all the work that's being done by all of the staff that's currently in labs, you know, the goal is that it is in AI ready form so that you can be predictive and you can use and leverage the work that your teams are doing. I mean, it's a significant expense if you look at, you know, what's happening from a, you know, OpEx and R&D, it's significant. And, you know, I think the challenge is, you know, what's the value that you get from it today and what's the future value that you get from the entire body of that work. And if it is all in a data lake, you know, in a single digital repository where you can query across and you can leverage, you know, not only are you not reworking, but, you know, maybe there is intellectual property that's resident within your company that you can actually sell, you know, that are commercializable products that have real problem spaces that you could bring to market that don't require any R&D whatsoever. And, you know, I think that to me, you know, that's a big point of digitalization, right? And I think in the future, and Jill talked about it a little bit, you know, you have your first party data. There's certainly, you know, third party data, there's academic data, there's known science, and that body of known science is growing constantly. And the question is, you know, how can your first party data, you know, how can you make sure that it's as valuable as possible and that you're getting as much value from it as possible? And ideally, you can plug that into these other data sets as you need to, and maybe even, you know, work with other companies as you need to to get to the finish line on something that actually, you know, is solving a really big problem that, you know, everyone can collectively make money on. You know, I definitely think that's the direction that every company is going in, right? And I mean, just like every company today is a software company, at some point in the future, every company will run AI, every single company in every space. And, you know, because we will be able to, because just like software, it will be ubiquitous. And so, you know, I think that's what I see is coming down the pike, and everyone should be getting prepared for that.
Totally agree. And we do have a few questions here that have come in through the Q&A. So thank you everyone who submitted those questions. I want to go ahead and start answering and kind of going through those. You know, we had a question here. Do you think the speed of innovation in your machine learning and AI services is a bit fast for larger enterprises? The scale that they have to distribute their product may require a massive overhaul of the mechanisms that produce them. So where does digital fit into solving this scale problem?
I mean, it depends where you're looking at. I mean, one of the things we like to try to do is the chemicals we invent. We also built a tool that we call reaction stage, so a synthetic route predictor. You need to know how to make it, right? So it's not just one thing. I'll predict, oh, this is what it should look like. But then the question is, how the hell do you make it? And you want to make it well. And what does well mean? It means high yield, high purity, least amount of steps, lowest cost, right? Yes, I think this question is a little bit what I addressed earlier. People don't really like to change, but you could imagine that, let's say you're a big chemical company, you sell one chemical for a lot. If I can improve their yield externally somehow by just like 0.3%, that's pure profit because they're not changing anything else, right? They're going to pay us something for that, but that's a big deal, and we're not scaling that for them. They are already at scale. We're tweaking or optimizing their process in order to have them make more money. Because I don't see, I mean, I like to partner with these, not just chemical companies, but with chemical companies, because I think they're going to host the chemicals we invent in their catalogs. They're going to scale up the synthesis. I'm never going to hire 3,000 chemists to bring in-house and do this. It'll be always through a CRO or through some sort of a partner. But the world is changing. I mean, a little while ago, Toyota announced that by 2050, their entire car would be biodegradable or recyclable. Think about it, a car. Think about the engine, the computer in it, everything, the glass, right? So that's too big for me to think about. But what I always tell my kids, think about problems like a steak. You can't eat the steak at once. You have to cut it into smaller pieces. So for me, I thought about clips. I'm trying to do a partnership with a plastic maker that puts 1,500 clips of one clip alone into one Toyota. What if we can invent a material that can go 1,500 times into one clip, into one Toyota? I think that would be pretty cool because we can then reuse that material, not just for clips, maybe for plastic bottles, right? And we know what the world's problems are. And but as a startup with limited resources, yes, even 20 million, it's a limited resource when you're trying to solve the world's biggest problem. And that's why right now we actually don't really play in the pharma space. And the reason is our AI doesn't care. But I don't want to run a schizophrenic company because the sales cycles are totally different. So in about 2022 timeframe, we're going to spin out a sister company called Foundation Pharma. It's just a placeholder name. And otherwise it doesn't become real. We can worry about the name later, but and just transfer the tools so that they do it for small drug discovery, right? Separate CEO, separate team, separate everything. And this is also very important for our submission to have the most powerful AI brain in all of chemical space, right? Because we're really excited by pesticides. Well, what's a pesticide? It's a small organic molecule. What's actually a drug? It's a small organic molecule. I have to think about specificity to kill a certain weed, right? They have to think specificity to kill a certain virus. I have to think about toxicity. They have to think about toxicity. I have to think about things like fungal silence resistance. That's when the weed mutates and goes, ha ha ha, you can't kill me anymore. And we've all heard of things like antibiotic resistance, right? So I just fantasize that the sister companies in the AI world can talk to each other, right? That learning of specificity to kill a virus, I'm sure will help Cabotics design better pesticides and fungicides for the futures. And that's why I think it's very important. But I'm just one person. I have a team of 17 growing. We're hiring at least 10 people. Yeah, I think the scaling problem won't be. People are getting older and the young people are coming in, and this idea that large enterprises don't like to change fast, that's how industries die.
And Sasha, I know this is something that you and I have talked a little bit about, is like the phased deployment or application of new technologies. And Jill, you addressed this a little bit with, whether it's, maybe it's first it's yield rates, then it's synthetic routing, new synthetic routes. Sasha, what's your take on, the deployment and use of new technologies? And actually, for maybe to both of you, if you have any advice to any of the attendees that are here from various corporations, how do we streamline, adoption of those new technologies in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, what we do is workflow automation in the lab. It's really digitalizing the library of processes that need to exist every day. So it's part IT and part OT. And, for us, it's a very straightforward, we come in, we take that inventory, we understand the inventory of processes, of test methods, and literally we're going in and we use AI to generate code, and we use AI to generate custom ontologies for our customers and custom applications for our customers. And we come in, we take that inventory, we ingest all of this information, and then we're auto-generating workflows so that their teams of people that, they're going to continue to keep on payroll can be significantly more efficient and significantly more effective. And, I think, look, you can start in one group, you can start in one lab. For us, the best place to start is where there's willingness, ability, and eagerness to change. I mean, to really, to Jill's point, because it does require people to think differently, to work differently, to do everything and have it be in the cloud and accessible everywhere instead of just in their lab notebook, for instance, or just in Excel on their computer. So, there is change that's required, but, there's definitely a way to do it once in one place to basically achieve some results, because what's the best is when you can say, hey, look, we took this process, it took 6 days, now it takes 6 minutes, and that's what you get when you actually adopt software and you automate your workflows. You achieve those results, and then you take those results to the next group and you say, let's duplicate those results. This worked for your colleagues. What you do is not dissimilar to what your colleagues are doing. At an abstracted level, it's the same thing, right? I mean, you've got that scientific process, you've got your hypothesis, you're proving and refining, or you're disproving and starting over. We know what that looks like. If we can digitalize that for your colleagues, we can digitalize it for you. And it's a real win for the CIO, because now all of a sudden you can rationalize tools and technologies. You have a single platform to manage. You can manage it centrally and deploy it locally. And it's tied to operating metrics and it's tied to financial metrics. And I think that's the benefit of workflow automation really, is that instead of having to wait for an entire product development cycle to know and to sell something, to know that you got value, you can see value week one, because now you have efficiency metrics and you can see that your teams and your people are more efficient. So the ROI on the IT spend is immediate. And I think, that's my background coming out of Accenture, but, to me, that's very, very powerful, right? Because I think the CIO has been in a challenging position, to Jill's earlier point. Now there's the office of the CDO. In very few companies are those actually one person, who does what, who's really driving change in an organization. But I think if you can empower the CIO to say, hey, I understand the corporate strategy, and here's how our IT infrastructure and our OT infrastructure is going to enable us to execute our strategy, then all of a sudden the CIO is the hero because they're enabling, right? They're not saying, hey, you can't run that. Hey, you can't deploy that. Hey, we can't put that in the cloud. They're actually saying, okay, here is infrastructure to help you do your job better and faster.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a need for quick wins, right? And that's true for any organizations, true for startups, corporations, anyone. You get that one quick win, even if it's just a small efficiency improvement, or if it's a larger improvement on a process, whatever it is, as long as there are tightly defined metrics and you can show, hey, we made this better, or we made this waste less. I think that's really, it sounds like once that initial domino falls, it's a lot easier to roll out more broadly across different departments. Just work with different teams at a big company. It sounds like you just need that first quick win, and then from there, hopefully, it's off to the races. All right, and
I agree.
Yeah. We have a.
Can I add something to that real fast? What's also important is a quick fail.
Mm.
You don't want to invent a new OLED, okay? That takes you 5 years or more to invent, to know that it actually, deteriorates rather quickly once you put it in the device because the water vapor transmission rate isn't good enough. Like how can you think about those tests while you're thinking about how you should create it? And as a scientist, I always wish there was this journal of stuff I tried that didn't work, where people explain what they did, what they were hoping for, and the actual result that they got. But with human egos and for-profit companies, this isn't doable. But that's the other great thing about the AI. We can actually give it what you and I would consider bad data. We call it good bad data. We're 100% sure that this doesn't work. Shove it in there and maybe say and don't make it look like that. But we want you to know it doesn't work because there's a learning. Think about us. Our greatest learnings are usually from our biggest messes, right? And that is something that our AI does as well. And you would like to know that this product line or this line of thinking doesn't work after you've invested the smallest amount of money instead of sinking in billions of dollars. Like in the pharma industry, you really want to nip it in the bud and not really wait for this drug to be used in humans. You'd like to have that be caught earlier, that it was bad. I mean, the thalidomide babies, I don't know if you remember what that was about. It was a morning sickness drug. That actually worked, yes. But there was 2 chiral isomers, which they didn't know how to separate. We know how to separate that nowadays. Now the drug will never come back because their marketing kind of was ruined. But that would never have happened today. And that's the kind of thing I think we can also prevent with the AI, because you taught it all the rules, and it's a little bit creepy to watch actually, because it dabbles in this chemical space here, it dabbles over there, it dabbles here, and then all of a sudden it converges, and I'm looking at it going, I got no clue how you got there, none whatsoever, but I'm just going to trust it, look at the end result and test it, and it worked. Okay, I don't really care how you got there. It's actually exactly what we wanted. Thank you. And how long did that take? Okay, we'll try to speed it up next time. So the failures are just, if not more important as the wins. But yes, the people in the companies need a quick win to sell it to upper management, so to get more money. So
yeah, I think I totally agree with that. And that actually segues us into the next question from Srinivas, which is, computational material science is certainly driving future in discovery right now. And speaking of these for-profit corporations or our current for-profit system, how do you see competitiveness developing? How much of that is targeted at AI engines and the availability of data sets to fuel discovery? Because obviously, we don't have fully open data across all organizations. So how do you see competitiveness shaping up as a result of these proprietary data sets, maybe proprietary algorithms, et cetera?
On the AI side?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Jill?
Yes, I wish there was a very good large database available, because you need at least 250,000 pieces of data for machine learning. And often you don't have enough data, or it's biased, or it's not good enough, or it's repetitive. Often data is very repetitive. So you have to be able to create your own data. I think the competitiveness is amongst not so much external companies right now. And I see them mainly playing in the pharma space, not so much in chemistry and materials. I mean, if you look at In Citro, they just raised another, I don't know, like $84 million. It's funny money. I don't really see a competitor with all the tools that we've built. The closest thing to us is Citrine Informatics, because they do material informatics. And I actually think competition is internal, like BASF would have a material informatics or a digital innovation department, but they still come and talk to us, companies like that. We look actually more at Zymergen and Ginkgo Bioworks as the platform companies in synthetic biology. And that's what we're striving to be in the chemical space. But in the future, one day, you will ask, you know, how is this best made? You know, it's chemical. Is it best made in a chemical way or in a synthetically biological way or a hybrid? Because if we can do the code for chemistry, I can hire in the people that can understand enough biology to do the code for biology, right? Mm-hmm. We don't really have a competitor. So we have about 14 different tools, like our reaction prediction, our property prediction for molecules. We started with this toxicity prediction, and we lined them all up. We have high throughput quantum chemistry calculations, all automated. And there are companies that just do one of those. So the most competition we have is when it comes to our reaction stage. So there's IBM Reaction, Reacsys, SciFinder, a bunch more. And we are actually best in class, better than anything on the market. And we actually also tested it against the best chemists in the world. And our thing beat it, them too. So I do believe there will be more competitors coming up. And this is why I didn't bootstrap this company. I feel like we had at least a 2-year early mover advantage. And we've built a lot in a very short time. And also I think it's important we built it from the ground up. So we have secrets and know-hows that just belong internally to Cobotics. And we look at what the outside world is doing, and then we decide internally what we think is better and really focus down. And COVID's actually been very beneficial for us in the sense that we're all sort of workaholics. And I think I've melded with my chair. And my back hurts actually, but yeah. So that's all I see right now in terms of competition, small and large. I think the competition is more internal in these big companies.
And I think, Jill, you answered the next question as well that we had, which is what differentiates each of your companies from the other materials informatics or materials adjacent companies. Sasha, I'd love to hear your take. You know, how does Alchemy, you know, I think we addressed this a little bit earlier on in the discussion, but where is Alchemy, you know, what's your superpower as a company, and maybe where are you different from some of any other offerings that are out there?
Yeah, I mean, so we're not in the AI space. I mean, that's clearly Jill's world. You know, what we're doing is building infrastructure for all of the lab staff so that we can generate AI-ready data and ultimately have that first-party information, you know, consolidated and ready to be predictive or to be used in a predictive way. And, you know, along the way, improve operating metrics in the lab and really turn, you know, all of those activities into value add 100% of the time. And what I'd say that is the most unique about what we're doing is that we have a no-code platform that enables us to generate workflows in an automated fashion. So, you know, when someone comes in and says, okay, we run, you know, 137 test types, and we've got 47 different workflows running, and it's distributed across 7 continents, and we've got, you know, 2,000 people, we say, okay, no problem. You know, here's our process. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's how we do it once on a smaller scale, and here's how we scale it out. And it's really the speed. So can you create custom applications fast? Because no one wants a 3-year SAP project, right? That's, you know, death by 1,000 paper cuts. And so, you know, if you can do that 3-year project in 3 months at that scale, it's really transformative for the organization. Now, the organization needs to want it and embrace change and be willing to retrain and so on and so forth. But it's completely transformational from an OpEx standpoint. So, that's, I'd say, the core of what it is that we do. And the output of that is data that is ready for Jill.
Gotcha. So there's this, it seems like there's really, kind of like temporal synergy between your two companies, because Sasha, you're the one that comes in and retrofits and kind of cleans house and makes it possible to integrate systems and work with companies such as Cubotics, and to be able to, make materials faster, to make value occur more quickly. So it seems like there's a nice little, temporal synergy there, which is good.
Yeah, we'd like to think so.
Mm-hmm. We have another question here specifically around the data. I'm curious to hear your take on this. So data of a company can be one of the company's biggest assets, kind of speaking to the proprietary aspect that we were talking about before. What is your take on data privacy concerns when you're using software built by a third party? I know this is something that, I've in my conversations with other corporations, one of the biggest challenges they have is data, not necessarily integrity per se, but they have to keep everything on-prem. They're not able to or allowed to send data or work with cloud providers, things like that in the materials and chemicals industry. So what are your take? How do, do we have to transition as an industry to be more comfortable with those solutions? How do we do that? How do we work with third parties?
I think the answer is ideally yes, but we've actually addressed the problem with technology. So, we run behind a VPN on a VPC. So, it's essentially locked down and it's theirs, and it meets the criteria of being on-prem without exactly, being running on some local computer. So I think it's technically addressable.
Yeah, I agree with that. But that's why it's very important that we can create our own data. We can help the customer without using their data. My understanding what Citrine Informatics does is they actually get the data. And when I was talking to Greg Mulholland, he said he had no problem getting the data from these big companies. And then I think he machine learns on that data. And same with Benevolent AI. I think they plugged in all the papers and patents for small drug discovery. And I think they came up, for possible coronavirus treatment. And they identified an arthritis drug, baricitinib. How many I's can there be in that letter, in that word? But they still don't, it gets you, I think if you don't clean the data, it's a little bit like a Google search, you get 5 to 10% improvement, and you have too many hits, you know what I mean? And we're trying to really get to the top 5 candidates to not waste time or money. But otherwise, it's a technical solution to keep that data secure, and we can work on premises remotely. Like we can bring our tools there so that nothing has to leave, because a lot of companies don't like that. But we also actually prefer not looking at their data. We want to know their problem and provide a solution, a deliverable, whether that's best synthetic route, optimizations of processes or equipment. But yeah, data can be very, very tricky because it's like their baby. They think it's so awesome and so beautiful. And you're like, it's actually not. I actually don't want to touch it.
Yeah, we need a, I think the next company that someone should create is a social media company for chemical companies to share baby photos of their data. I think
that's a good point, actually. It reminds me of, there probably needs to be sort of a consortium like the semiconductor industry did a few years ago, Semitech, where it was sort of for-profit companies and the government in order to really, it catapulted the semiconductor industry. And I also look at that materials genomics initiative from 10 years ago. I think I'm in year 1 of that, sort of as Cubotics, just in chemistry. So I do hope it goes to open databases, because I think even the data that we generate, if you saw our data, you wouldn't know what to do with it. Like, it's like,
yeah,
it's like reading hieroglyphics.
Yeah, and actually, so that's perfect for the next question, which is, I think Stuart's giving you both a chance to brag. Obviously, big corporations are really skilled, and they're crucial to the development process in terms of, scaling, distribution. They are absolutely crucial to that process. But before getting to that point, can both of you speak to some examples of maybe, I think this is focused on AI techniques that have not only created and identified new chemicals and materials and commercialized them, but maybe Sasha as well for you, if you can give a couple of case studies of examples of corporations that you've worked with, maybe some of the benefits that you've been able to provide from a workflow automation perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think, out of the gate, there's at least a 30% productivity gain by digitalizing the superset of workflows in a lab. So, and whether that productivity gain is achieved in the context of incremental capacity in that lab, so, the staff can do more projects than they were able to handle before, or do you need that level of staff? I mean, that's really a business decision for a company, but there's certainly that. I think that the other thing that's really critical on the revenue side is, conversion rate on samples. So, I mean, we're working with companies that are selling products that they already have in market today, right? That require application testing, that need to fit for the customer's intended use and actually meet performance and functional specs. And so, if you can actually increase their rate of conversion of those samples to sales, it's tremendously beneficial, right? Because now your cost base has stayed the same and you're actually selling more on that same cost base. So it's tremendously impactful. And we've seen that rise as high as 70% on custom formulation work, right? Because if you're in a competitive situation and the formula needs to work and you can actually turn the formula around, the sample around quicker, or you can do more iterations on that sample relative to your competitive set, then you're in a preemptive sales process, right? You're there before your competition. And so these are really important business metrics that we track and monitor. Every sample out, what's the feedback? Do we need to iterate? Can we get that sample closed, and turn that into revenue? So I just think there's so many levers for a big company. I mean, like up and down the food chain, from large global enterprise all the way down to mid-market, where you can really come in, automate, and achieve dramatic business benefit. And again, I would say increasing conversion rate on samples is immediate revenue, and increasing capacity in the lab is immediate cost benefit.
Gotcha. Makes a lot of sense. And Jill, I know you addressed this a little bit earlier, but if you want to speak to a case study or an example of an actual chemical material, I don't know if there is one maybe in the market today already, but any examples that you can point to of materials that have been commercialized via computational material or computational chemistry or AI techniques?
In the pharma space, certainly like through companies like Benevolent AI. But for us ourselves, I'd mentioned the case study with NIH, right? That's a benefit, the reduction of the amount of enzyme and the reduction of time. The example of the lubricants that saving hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is all part of commercialization. We're in the process of licensing that electrochromic. We're a very young company, so these are the metrics I will have to prove for my Series B. I just closed the Series A. We're accepting a little bit more money just because there was a lot of interest. And yeah, I try to raise money every 18 to 24 months. We did get a grant from Massachusetts Life Sciences with Northeastern to come up with pigments that react in the dark places for photodynamic cancer therapy. So photodynamic sounds like you need light, right? So how the hell would that happen? But cancers usually live inside us in dark places like our brains. And none of that is ready yet for the market like that. So the way we work with companies, they approach us, there's a discussion. If it's good enough, usually there's an NDA signed, and then people share the problems that they want to address, a statement of work is written, we price it out, and then we execute on it and deliver it.
Perfect. And actually that brings up the next couple of questions here from both James and Raju. Both of them are working, are at startups, and they're curious. James is saying, as a startup that's developing nanocomposites and high and low end monomers to create gradient refractive index optics, what is the inflection point at which point it makes sense for a startup to work with Alchemy, to work with Kibotics? Obviously, I think like we've been talking a lot today about working with larger companies, but is there a way for startups to also partner with you both, or to work with you to streamline their processes, or even make it maybe faster for them to produce new materials?
As I said, I think it's best to have a discussion. It's usually, we can see if there's something to do together now or in the future. And it's all about time and money, right? But if it's something would be easy for us to do, then it's more likely to be a yes out of the gate.
And I would say for us, typically the smallest companies that we work with are in the mid-market, because if they're not people and projects at scale, then it may not make sense to deploy the software. I think at some point in the future, we may have a self-service product. So the configuration engine that we use internally, and actually it's a staff of chemists that use it, that configure workflows, et cetera. At some point that may become something that we expose to smaller companies who want to do this process themselves. We don't do that today, but it's something that we're certainly considering for the future.
Great. And I think this has been a really good discussion to talk about the materials and everything, kind of that all the different solutions that you're bringing to this industry. And one of the things that I was really excited about today is the fact that we have two successful female entrepreneurs in a pretty male-dominated industry. So I'd be curious, maybe if you're comfortable talking a little bit about your experience building innovative companies in the materials space. What has that been like? And do you have any advice for other female entrepreneurs out there?
Jill, do you want to start, or would you like me to start?
No, I can start. So first of all, I don't run my companies as a woman. I run my companies as the CEO that the company needs, actually, and indicating that the job is actually malleable. And you can see that the CEO that you would need from C to Series A to Series B to IPO and beyond, that brings, you need different skill sets at different levels and different nuances and how to deal with growing institutions. Since I was a little girl, I wanted to be an inventor. I thought that was the coolest thing. I didn't care about money or I kind of wanted to be in the business of science, and I didn't really know how all that would work out, but I thought that I could get there by entrepreneurship and science. So that's why I have a PhD in chemistry, and I decided to bootstrap. That means I took on no capital, a capital equipment company out of my home, actually almost on the same block. And I grew that to, also it's funny, we're like sisters, 20 million a year run rate. I got bored, and also I was going through a brutal divorce, and the court said I had to pay him half. I quit. You can see that all my companies have an homage to Cambridge. That's why it's 02139. That's a zip code. That's the zip code I live in. And the first one's called Cambridge Nanotech. And the reason I do that is because I'm an immigrant several times over. Right before the US, I was at University of Toronto. And I was the best chemistry student across all three campuses at University of Toronto. And Harvard and MIT offered me a full ride, and I chose Harvard. And I can tell you that I'm smart and I deserve that, but I didn't feel that I felt eternally grateful. And there's something very special about the city of Cambridge. So if you haven't been here, it's not beautiful. There's more beautiful cities in the world. Certainly the people aren't that attractive, but we're all very highly grumpy and opinionated, and the currency here is intelligence, which is what I really, really like. So it doesn't matter what you look like. It's about your ideas and what you can deliver. So I think my dad says that I have a disease called entrepreneuring, and he's right. There's many easier ways to make money. You have to be passionate about what you want to be building, and you have to be passionate about your team. But you just go for it, and you grow as a person. You really do. And you have to be okay with hearing a lot of no's. That's why Cobotics actually is a very special startup for me. Usually if you have a startup, you do the reach out and people hang up the phone on you. And here it was like influx of giant companies wanting to talk to you. And we're like, we need a VP of BD right now. I know we haven't built anything yet, but they want it. So let's see if we can stretch the VC dollars with their contract. And no, we don't want to be a fee to play company forever. We want to be a standalone chemical company of the 21st century with that sister company for drug discovery. Yeah, I love what I do. It's probably not the best job to have since I have workaholic tendencies. You know, I have 2 kids, and it also allows me, I think years ago there was an article written called Babies in Boardrooms, because I literally took my babies to board meetings. Yep. But so I think it allows me to balance my life more, being a mom.
And maybe over to you, Sasha. You know, obviously, one, you know, being in a relatively male-dominant industry, building Alchemy, but also I know, you know, all the challenges right now of building a lot of, you know, building a startup is about having a culture. And I know Alchemy is, you're working across multiple different offices. We're in the middle of a pandemic. What's it like building a company in this environment?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, you know, whether it's COVID now or it's 2008 or it was, you know, 01, 02, 03, I mean, there's always things that happen. You know, and I think in the life of a startup, it's a roller coaster. There's big, you know, ups, there's big downs, and, you know, sometimes you're upside down and then you come out on the other end, and you have to be really prepared for it. You know, I think similar to Jill, it's a lifestyle choice more than a job. So you dream about it, you talk about it, you know, it consumes you, and you really do need to love every aspect of it. So what is the product that you're building? Who am I working with every day? Because you probably see them more than your spouse and your kids. And do I love the business of the startup too? Because I think all 3 of those things really need to come together in order to scale your business up. And yeah, so I would say, you know, my advice to an entrepreneur, male or female, is just make sure you love it, like every dimension of it, because it will be, you know, front and center, awake at, you know, when you're asleep constantly. You know, I would say just on the female question, I mean, I think over the course of my career, the last 25 years, I mean, you get used to being one of few or the only, and, you know, it kind of is what it is. And I think you try to make the best of that situation. So, you know, maybe they remember you because you were, you know, different from the majority of the other people that they met with at the trade show or, you know, in the meeting. And, you know, you try to turn something that may be perceived as a liability, you try to turn it into an asset as much as you possibly can.
Totally, that makes a lot of sense. And I really like both of your, you know, just approach to life, really. So, you know, I know we are coming up at the end of our time here. So do either of you have any final comments that you'd like to make for anyone in our audience?
I would say, you know, and whether it's working with Jill's company or working with Alchemy, I mean, I just think that the reality is every company needs to embrace technology and needs to embrace change, you know, whatever direction you decide to go in. I mean, I think to me, it's very, very clear that you know, this is the future. And the sooner the management team and the entire company gets on board with the fact that digitalization is here, that software tools are not going away, that there are going to be more and different kinds of tools and technologies that need to be deployed in an organization, the better off they're going to be, because they will be open to it and think about how to leverage it and really be in a leading position as opposed to a fast follower or a lagging position. So I think that's, I would say, a general comment that I would make that's not specific to my company per se, but that I think is very important for every company.
Yeah, how do you stay ahead of the curve, and how do you stay ahead of your competitors? And make every dollar count, right? The way I look at technology is it allows me to do more in a finite amount of time. I mean,
and with a finite amount of resources.
And finite amount of resources. And, you know, I'll just end on this one, but my kids didn't ask for such a driven mother, right? So what I try to do is make them feel like I'm stay at home. And the way I can do that is because of the smartphone, right? Okay, so I also sleep with it. But that way I'm at every soccer game, at every basketball game, I'm at home for dinner. I also don't sleep through the night. That's not a problem. I'm just done. It's what she said. It's like, it's usually 4 a.m. So if you ever get an email at 4 a.m. from me, I was just done sleeping. There's not a problem. It's just, I'm good. The house is nice and quiet. My brain is really functioning well. And I can be so productive between like 4 and 6 p.m. I might lie down again for 30 minutes. But it's a passion for life. It's a passion to do this. And you haven't even met my awesome team. Like it's a fun place to work. That's the other thing. And yeah, it's not always great. And it can be very anxiety provoking, especially, making payroll if you think you're running out of money and all that stuff. But if I may, real quick, because you spoke about male dominated. I've never felt that. Oh, I can't share my screen unless you let me. You're muted.
I think
Stop sharing your screen and I can share mine.
Yes, I think Ali, our coordinator, can help a little with that. Ali, can you help us with that? Maybe.
All right, maybe not.
She's on mute too.
All right, I was just gonna show a picture of my team, and I think it's a very diverse team, so I'm kind of proud of that. But yeah, it's 12:30, and I gotta cook lunch for my kids.
Sasha and Jill, thank you both so much for joining today. This has been a really inspiring discussion. I think I've learned a lot from talking to you both, and I think Alchemy and Kibotics are both open for business. So please do feel free to reach out. Jill and Sasha, you can see their contact information here on this slide.